David and Laura Simmons had the kind of marriage everyone envied, until Laura vanished on a cold November night. Days later, her body was found in a shallow grave, and what began as heartbreak turned into a twisted path of revenge that would leave four more people dead, including David himself. David and Laura Simmons were the kind of couple people envied. They had been married for 8 years, building a life together in a quiet Colorado suburb. Their home sat on a tree-lined street, where neighbors waved from their porches and children played until sunset. David owned a small but successful construction company, and Laura worked as an elementary school teacher. They seemed perfect, always smiling in photos, always together at neighborhood gatherings. To the outside world, their life was a picture of happiness. But pictures can lie.it began with subtle changes. Laura's laughter became less frequent, and her phone never left her side. David noticed her late-night text conversations and quick exits to answer calls. But when he asked, she brushed it off as work matters. He told himself it was stress, that every marriage had rough patches. Still, something in his gut whispered that this was different. Then came the night everything changed. It was a cold evening in early November. The sky was clear, stars scattered like diamonds, and the streets were quiet. Laura had said she was meeting a friend for dinner. She kissed David on the cheek, told him she wouldn't be late, and walked out the door. That was the last time he saw her alive. When midnight came and she hadn't returned, David's worry turned to panic. He called her phone repeatedly, each ring ending in voicemail. At first, he tried to convince himself there was an explanation. Maybe her phone had died. Maybe she decided to stay overnight. But when dawn broke and Laura still wasn't home, fear gripped him completely. He contacted the police, and soon, the search began. Laura's car was found later that morning, abandoned on an isolated back road just outside town. The driver's side door was open, and inside were her purse, wallet, and cell phone. The keys were still in the ignition. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no footprints leading away from the car. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Friends, neighbors, and volunteers joined the search effort, combing the woods and fields in the bitter cold. Flyers with Laura's smiling face appeared on every telephone pole and storefront. For 3 agonizing days, there were no answers. On the 4th day, a hiker exploring a wooded area stumbled upon something that stopped him in his tracks: a shallow grave hidden beneath a thick layer of leaves and dirt. Inside was Laura's body. She had been strangled, her clothing torn, and her face partially covered by soil. It was a sight that would haunt the hiker forever. When the news broke, the town fell silent. Laura, the beloved teacher, the woman with the bright smile, was gone, and someone had put her there. Detectives descended on the Simmons home, questioning David for hours. He was shattered, barely able to speak, but he answered everything. Where had he been the night she disappeared? At a business meeting with clients. Did he know anyone who would want to hurt her? No, never. He clung to the hope that the killer would be caught quickly, that justice would come. But justice would prove elusive. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation took a chilling turn. Laura's death was not random, and the secrets she kept would become the first cracks in the story of a perfect life. What began as grief for David would soon ignite something far darker, a need for vengeance that would consume everything in its path. The autopsy confirmed what everyone feared. Laura's death was violent and deliberate. She had been strangled, and there were no defensive wounds, suggesting she might have known her killer. This detail made detectives suspicious from the start. Random attacks usually left evidence of a struggle, but this felt personal, controlled, almost intimate. Detectives began reconstructing Laura's final hours. Phone records revealed a series of messages sent late at night, long after she had told David she was meeting a friend. These messages weren't to a female friend at all. They were to a man named Eric Wallace. Eric owned a local gym just a few miles away. As investigators dug deeper, the truth spilled out. Laura had been having an affair for nearly 6 months. The discovery rocked the case wide open. Suddenly, the loving image of a devoted wife crumbled, replaced by a web of lies and secrecy. The focus shifted from finding an unknown predator to unraveling a tangled chain of relationships. Eric Wallace quickly became the prime suspect. He was 38, divorced, and known in town as charming but private. Detectives brought him in for questioning, and his reaction was cool, even detached. Eric admitted to the affair without hesitation. He painted the relationship as passionate but complicated, claiming that he and Laura had talked about a future together, but that she had doubts about leaving David. He insisted they ended things weeks before her disappearance. His story was clean, but his alibi was weak. He said he had been at home the night Laura vanished, watching television alone. Investigators weren't convinced. They searched Eric's home and car, looking for anything that tied him to the crime scene. They found nothing. No fibers, no fingerprints, no sign of blood. Forensic teams combed through his gym, his personal belongings, and his financial records, but everything came back clean. Without physical evidence, the case against him was circumstantial at best. While police were zeroing in on Eric, they couldn't ignore David. Statistically, when a wife is murdered, the husband is almost always the first suspect. They scrutinized his every move that night. David claimed he was at a business dinner, and several witnesses confirmed it. Surveillance footage from the restaurant backed up his timeline. He appeared devastated during interviews, breaking down when shown Laura's last known photos. Still, something about his grief unsettled detectives. It was raw, but there was an undercurrent of anger. Friends said David had been deeply in love with Laura, almost to the point of obsession. Investigators wondered, could a man so devoted simply let go? The case reached a deadlock. Public opinion swung wildly. Some believed Eric had killed Laura in a fit of jealousy. Others thought David's heartbreak was an act. But without evidence, there was no arrest. Weeks stretched into months. Laura's funeral came and went, her grave marked with flowers that withered as winter crept in. For David, life became unbearable. He stopped attending social gatherings, avoided calls, and eventually sold his construction business. People whispered about how much he had changed. What they didn't know was that David had started something in secret. Late at night, he would sit in his dimly lit living room, staring at Laura's photo, and scroll through every detail of Eric Wallace's life. He learned his routines, his favorite bars, the trails he liked to hike. David wasn't waiting for the justice system anymore. In his mind, the system had already failed. He believed Eric had taken everything from him, and now he was going to take something back. What began as grief had turned into something darker, something that wouldn't stop until blood was spilled. 2 years passed, and Laura's case faded from the headlines. The world moved on, but David Simmons didn't. His life had become a shell of what it once was. The man who once woke before sunrise to manage his construction crews now barely left his cabin in the mountains. Friends tried to reach out, but he ignored their calls. They thought grief had swallowed him whole, but in truth, something much darker had taken root. Every night, David returned to the same ritual. He sat in the dim light of his living room, poring over old news articles, photos, and social media posts. Most of them weren't about Laura anymore. They were about Eric Wallace. David knew where Eric lived, the gym he owned, and the bars he frequented. He tracked Eric's hiking routes, studied his schedule, and memorized every detail he could find. It was an obsession, but David didn't call it that. To him, it was justice. The law had failed, and he would not Meanwhile, Eric Wallace had rebuilt his life. He closed the gym temporarily after the investigation, but later reopened under a new name. The whispers about his involvement in Laura's death never completely faded, but without charges, he lived free. He even started dating again, something that infuriated David every time he saw a photo online. The man he believed had taken his wife was out there smiling, drinking, living, and David could not forgive that. He spent months planning. This wasn't going to be a crime of passion. It was going to be precise, deliberate, and final. He bought a second-hand truck under a fake name, paid cash for supplies, and drove hours away to purchase items so no one would connect them to him. A tarp, duct tape, a burner phone, and tools were stored neatly in a locked chest inside his cabin. David was patient, waiting for the perfect opportunity when Eric would be alone, far from security cameras or crowds. That opportunity came one summer evening. Eric had developed a routine of hiking a particular trail near a state park. It was remote, rugged, and far enough from town to guarantee privacy. David had followed him there twice before, always leaving, without making a move. But on that third trip, everything aligned. Eric parked his SUV at the trailhead as the sun dipped behind the mountains. The area was quiet, only the hum of insects breaking the silence. He started his hike, earbuds in, completely unaware that a truck sat concealed behind a cluster of trees a mile away. David waited until Eric was deep into the trail before moving. The details of what happened next were never captured on any camera, never witnessed by another soul. What is known as this? Eric Wallace never returned from that hike. His SUV sat, abandoned in the parking lot overnight, then for days. Search teams combed the forest, calling his name, but found nothing. No phone, no clothing, no trace. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. The investigation into Eric's disappearance raised questions, but with no body and no evidence of foul play, the case quickly went cold. People speculated about suicide, others about him running from debt or guilt. What no one imagined was that Eric's body lay hidden where no one would think to look, buried deep beneath layers of soil and rock. His life ended by the hands of a man who once vowed to love until death. But David's mission didn't end there. Killing Eric should have satisfied him, but it didn't. The anger still burned, now hotter than before. He began looking at others, those who knew about the affair and kept it secret. In his mind, they were just as guilty. And for them, the clock had already started ticking. The months following Eric Wallace's disappearance brought a strange calm to David's life. For the first time in years, he felt in control, as though the crushing weight on his chest had lifted. But the relief was fleeting. Each night, when the quiet of his cabin settled around him, the same thought crept in. Laura had trusted people who betrayed her, and they were still out there, living without consequence. In David's mind, that wasn't justice. It was unfinished business. He turned his attention to those closest to Laura, especially those who knew about the affair and said nothing. Among them was Megan Turner, Laura's best friend. During the investigation, detectives learned Megan had exchanged late-night messages with Laura about her relationship with Eric. Megan never told David. To him, that silence made her complicit. He convinced himself that if Megan had spoken up, Laura might still be alive. That belief became an obsession. That Megan's daily routine was easy to follow. She worked at a local bakery, jogged every morning along the same route, and posted everything on social media. David watched for weeks before making his move. It was early on a foggy morning when Megan laced up her running shoes and set out on the empty road that cut through the woods. She never saw the truck approach from behind. The hit was fast, violent, and calculated. Megan's body landed in a ditch, and David didn't stop to check if she was breathing. The newspapers called it a tragic hit and run, another accident, on a dangerous rural road. No one suspected it was the second step in David's quiet war, but David wasn't done. Soon after Megan's death, another name surfaced in his thoughts, a co-worker of Laura's, Beth Nolan. Beth had confronted Laura months before the murder, urging her to end the affair. David saw that as proof Beth had known the truth but chose to keep it from him. In David's mind, that secrecy was unforgivable. He followed Beth for days, learning her habits. One weekend, she joined friends on a lake trip. David watched from a distance as they laughed on the dock, the sound of their voices carrying across the water. That night, when everyone slept, he cut the ropes on the small boat Beth planned to take out in the morning. By sunrise, Beth was gone. Her friends thought she went for an early ride, but when they found the overturned boat hours later, panic set in. Her body surfaced 2 days later, and authorities ruled it a tragic drowning. 3 deaths now hung like shadows over the town, but no one connected them. Each looked like an isolated tragedy, random, senseless accidents. But detectives working on Megan's case began to see faint threads. The hit and run seemed too clean. No witnesses, no tire marks, nothing left behind. And then there was Beth's drowning. Her life jacket was missing, and the cut ropes raised questions. Investigators reopened Laura's file, sifting through old interviews and names. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Every victim had ties to Laura Simmons and the secrets surrounding her affair. The suspicion grew stronger when security footage surfaced from a gas station near the road Megan jogged that morning. A dark truck, its plates obscured by mud, appeared on the screen minutes before the estimated time of the crash. Detectives traced the make and model but hit a dead end until a clerk remembered a tall man with piercing blue eyes paying in cash, his demeanor cold and distant. The description fit David Simmons. Authorities kept their discovery quiet, choosing to watch rather than confront. They placed unmarked cars near his cabin, monitored his movements, and waited for a mistake. But David sensed the walls closing in. His once methodical calm began to crack. He stayed up through the night, pacing the floors, checking the windows, knowing the reckoning he had long imagined was near. And as the snow began to fall in the mountains, David made a decision. If this was the end, he would decide how they. Story closed. Not the police. The first snow of winter blanketed the mountains in silence, covering the narrow roads that led to David Simmons' remote cabin. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. Stacks of newspaper clippings covered the dining table, every headline screaming the tragedies that had rocked the town. Beloved teacher slain. Local woman killed in hit and run. Weekend trip ends in tragedy. Gym owner missing without a trace. To anyone else, they were disconnected stories. To David, they were chapters in a book he was writing with blood. For weeks, unmarked cars had been parked just far enough down the mountain road to avoid suspicion. Investigators had enough circumstantial evidence to warrant surveillance, but they needed more to make an arrest. They monitored his trips to town, noting his growing paranoia. David rarely spoke to anyone now. He had stopped shopping at his usual stores, withdrawn cash instead of using cards, and avoided cameras whenever possible. He could feel them closing in. Inside the cabin, David meticulously organized his belongings. There was no panic in his movements, only a chilling calm. He packed nothing for escape. Instead, he gathered items that mattered most: Laura's wedding ring, the last photograph they took together, and a handwritten note he had drafted dozens of times but never finalized. He sealed the note in a plastic bag and placed it beside the photo. Detectives planned to approach him within days, but David wasn't going to give them that chance. He drove his truck deep into the forest, far beyond where any road signs guided the way. The snow crunched under the tires as the path narrowed, swallowed by towering pines. When the truck could go no farther, David left it behind, taking only his pack and a rifle slung over his shoulder. His boots left a lonely trail of prints in the untouched snow as daylight faded. David reached a clearing with a view of the valley. Below, the wind bit at his face, but he didn't flinch. He laid out his belongings carefully on a flat rock: the ring, the photograph, and the sealed note. Then he sat down and stared at the horizon, the orange glow of sunset bleeding into the icy blue of night. For the first time in years, the weight on his chest eased. He had done what he believed the world wouldn't. In his mind, Laura could finally rest. The single gunshot echoed through the trees. When officers eventually tracked the signal from his abandoned truck, it took them 3 days to find him. His body was frozen, slumped against the rock, the rifle by his side. The note explained everything in haunting detail: how he had followed Eric Wallace, how he had orchestrated Megan's and Beth's deaths, and why he believed they all deserved to die. At the bottom of the page, scrawled in jagged letters, was a single sentence: "They left her to die. I couldn't." The revelation stunned the town. People who once pitied David now whispered about the monster grief had created. For lives, all taken in the name of love and vengeance, ending with his own. Detectives closed the cases, but the chilling truth lingered, a reminder that heartbreak can twist into something far more dangerous than anyone imagines. When spring came, hikers reported that the clearing where David took his life became eerily silent, as if the mountain itself remembered. The flowers that bloomed near the rock seemed out of place against the barren earth, marking the spot where love curdled into rage. The story of David Simmons spread far beyond the quiet town, not as a tale of justice, but as a warning. Grief is a fire that, when left unchecked, consumes everything, even the soul that carries it.